Good Thursday afternoon. It is October 12th. A dual update for you. First on Hurricane Ophelia out in the northeastern parts of the Atlantic. And also we're going to talk about what's going on in California with the widespread wildfires burning over 170,000 acres so far in that state there. First, we're going to start out in the Atlantic, talking about Hurricane Ophelia. You look closely, well-defined eye, a bit of strengthening has happened over the last few hours. Sustained winds now of over 90 miles per hour. Now, it's sitting way out there in the northeastern parts of the Atlantic. No immediate threats to any land. And it's in an area right now that has very weak steering. So it's been kind of sitting in the same area for the past 36 hours. But you look off to the north and west, there is a cold front. So Ophelia is going to actually hitch a ride on some westerlies that'll pick it up and drive it off to the north and east in the coming days. A very elongated front here, and this is the same front that moved through parts of the mid-Atlantic last night that's dropped our temperatures from very warm for this time of the season numbers that were in the mid-80s. Now, thanks to that, sag to the south, we're getting a little bit cooler, but it will pick up Ophelia way out there in the Atlantic and eventually drag it to the north. Now, this is something a little bit different from what we've looked at in the past. This is the National Hurricane Center outlook on Hurricane Ophelia, but I've also overlaid sea surface temperatures. We've certainly talked about that a lot this season with how warm the ocean waters have been. In this part of the Atlantic, the farther north you get, obviously the cooler the waters are. But even though still in the upper 70s and a few spots around 80. For tropical development, you usually need temperatures of 80 degrees or warmer. So it's pretty impressive that this storm has sustained itself with minimal amounts of heat energy in terms of this part of the Atlantic Ocean there. So again, a Category 1 storm, 90-mile-per-hour winds with gusts up to 115. It does start to get a move on rather quickly in the next 24 hours off to the north and east, making a brush by of the Azores, maintaining a Category 1 status, although the water temperatures will be getting cooler as it heads off to the northeast and eventually off to the north. Look what happens here throughout the weekend. Takes almost a turn due north towards the United Kingdom. And by this point, early in next week, it could make a direct run at Ireland. In fact, we've talked about in the past with storms how the northeast quadrant of tropical systems usually packs the strongest winds. If this track was to actually come to fruition, this would bring a pretty good lashing to parts of Ireland there with winds of hurricane force, if not stronger at that point. Although in this part in its transition, it will likely turn over to an extra tropical storm and maybe not be tropical at this point. So we're going to have to watch it closely. Nonetheless, likely some issues happening there in Ireland and the United Kingdom. Although it's rare, has happened before. There's a few storms we're going to talk about here. First, back in 1961, Hurricane Debbie made it to a Category 3 storm. Now, there is some debate here because some say it may not have had tropical characteristics by the time it moved on off towards the north. A very similar track to what we're going to see Ophelia do in the next couple days. Track just to the west of Ireland there brought winds of over 100 miles per hour and a whole lot of damage there. Thankfully, Ophelia won't be as strong. It won't be a Category 3 storm in its lifetime. It's only going to make it to a Category 1, but still something really got to watch closely. Also here in more modern times that made impact in Europe in general was 2005 with Hurricane Vince. This only made it to be a Category 1 storm, but notice a rather short lifetime here. It developed only a few hundred miles off to the west and then tracked almost due east towards Spain and Portugal, eventually making landfall there. Usually, if Europe does see any influence from tropical systems, it's anywhere from August, September, and October. Notice that's the tail end of the Atlantic hurricane season as they develop along the eastern seaboard and kind of take that long loop over the Atlantic and then eventually die out. So that's usually what happens there. In terms of the Atlantic season this year, been very active. In fact, the last 10 named storms have all made it to a hurricane status or higher. Category 1 status or higher, and we're at our 15th named storm with Ophelia. Record-breaking all across the board this season so far. Franklin to Ophelia, the last 10 named storms in a row, all became a Category 1 hurricane or stronger. That's notable because that's the first time it's happened in over 100 years. In fact, the last time it happened was all the way back in 1893. And that also begs the question, we're at 15 named storms now. Our list goes up to 21 names. What happens if we get 6 more named storms and we run out of names? Well, it's happened before. 2005, that very active season with Hurricane Katrina. Then we start using the Greek alphabet at that point. So alpha, beta, from there on out. Also, I want to talk about how in the world did we know that there were hurricanes out in the ocean in the 1800s? Because remember I said the last time that happened was 1893. There were no satellites then. Satellite era was 1960 onwards. Well, there are some geological markers that storms leave when they make impact on land. whether it be in corals, they're leaving some markers in the coral, stalagmites in caves, and also sediment deposits in coastal lakes via storm surge there. Also in the late 1960s, they began to establish a comprehensive network of meteorological observation stations. And on top of that, you had ship reports from sailors traversing the Atlantic to let you know if there was a storm that moved through or they interacted with one. So that helped to let us track hurricanes over a longer duration of time to kind of get a better glimpse into what they were doing and the history of it. So there you go. All right, also, now let's jump to the other side of the world pretty much and talk about what's going on out in California. Almost the exact opposite here with a lack of any rainfall in terms of tropical systems there. It's been very, very dry, very, very hot, and the winds are picking up, the Santa Ana winds, and that's driving some wildfires there. In fact, 170,000 acres have burned in that state so far. To give you some perspective, that's 4 times the size of the District of Columbia, Washington, D.C. So a very, very large area there. And fire weather watches are up, red flag warnings in all of the areas in red from all north of Los Angeles all the way up towards Sacramento and Redding, due to the fact that the conditions are just perfect for these storms, or not these storms, these fires to really flare up and maintain themselves with plenty of fuel on the ground. So what does a red flag warning mean? Critical fire weather is occurring now or will be shortly. That's the combination of strong winds, warm temperatures, and also low humidity, creating plenty of kindling on the ground there. So the overall setup is high pressure off to the north and northeast of California right now. That clockwise flow is driving the winds in out of the north and east over the mountains, sustained winds gusting as high as 30 to 40 miles per hour. Now, what happens when they descend the mountain ranges there, that leads to high to moderate fire danger. When air sinks, it warms and it dries out, creating very low humidity environments here, drying out all the brush and the vegetation and creating plenty of kindling for any of these fires to maintain themselves. In fact, I think a lot of the fires are 0% contained still. So dire situation there, and it's also claimed many, many lives. So we'll continue to watch this closely for you, both sides over with Hurricane Ophelia and, of course, the wildfires in California. Another update coming at you tomorrow. Hope you enjoy your afternoon. If you want to join us on Facebook, the conversation, meteorologist Tim Pandajis, or on Twitter, 13 Tim Pandajis.